My name is Caroline Nguyen, and I'm with the U.S. Customer Marketing Team. I'm here with our Regional Product Manager for Security and Docking Stations, Phil Gutierrez, who will break down docking stations in the modern classroom. So we're going to be walking over trends in EdTech and the impact on purchasing decisions, pain points and challenges for teachers and IT, user scenarios to know, and how to reduce confusion with Pro Concierge. All right, that's it for me. I'm going to pass the mic over to Phil.
Thank you so much, Carolyn. So for everyone on the phones, thank you guys, first off, so much for actually being able to attend today. I know you guys have very busy schedules. So, lucky for me, specifically for education, I've been able to attend a lot of different focus groups, and I'm excited to really share a lot of the information we have today to just help paint the picture of education, right? So I think a lot of times, we spend a good amount of energy trying to figure out how to focus with this vertical, and we'll be able to share a lot of great points on what's happening overall in the category, even down to the accessory level, and then of course, why docking stations, right? Does it even make sense in education? So without further ado, let's get started. So right off the bat, we want to understand today, what is the education landscape, right? What are those devices out there? 4 or 5 years ago, tablets, I think, were the new hot thing. So specifically around Apple iPads, they were at one point what we thought the education space was going to turn into. But as we all know, as time has progressed, those iPad price points really haven't gone down. And those Chromebooks, though, at the same time specifically have hit that price point where it's been very friendly for a buyer in the education space. And at the same time, Google has done an excellent job of really expanding their ecosystem around Chromebooks to help with that learning and teaching experience as well, right? So right off the bat in 2017, you're going to see Google at 60% of all the hardware devices out there, specifically with Chromebook devices. It's not to say, Microsoft or Apple aren't really hitting it hard, but as we know at this point, Google has taken a clear lead. So to dive into the numbers just a little deeper, right? So like I said earlier, 60% Chromebooks in the US. Laptop devices in the Windows space as well is still around roughly 25%. Funny enough, in the rest of the world, it's actually flipped. Windows is a huge leader in that space, with Chromebooks taking a second to even third place at times. But I think at the end of the day, what is a clear trend here is the fact that the tablet ID is not necessarily what people are looking for in the education space, and that laptop ID is actually what the form factor that teachers, educators are looking to have for their students, because at the end of the day, it's going to allow them a lot more when they're in the classroom. So driving factors on those Chromebooks, right? So like I said earlier, Chromebooks are hitting that nice, sweet price point and still getting a lot of power within those Chromebooks, right? So being able to get all of the quad-core processing, 4 gigabits of memory, et cetera, you're really getting a lot for your money, which is why Chromebooks have taken such a leap. And like I said earlier as well, those education apps that are really expanding the ecosystem, it's giving those teachers an extra avenue to communicate with their students, right? So now, we're so used to writing all of our notes on our notebooks and all of our homework assignments, et cetera, when we were in school. And now that's essentially a thing of the past, especially with some of the apps that have been provided like Meet or Hangouts for Google. It's allowing those teachers to now communicate with their students outside of the classroom, right? So it's a great opportunity to expand on that, specifically around Google Chromebooks. And of course, right, even though education, Chromebooks are by far the leader, Chromebooks are now starting to actually leak into the consumer lifestyles, right? Like, for example, you and I, we're still looking for a nice price point for ourselves to buy a laptop, and Chromebooks are actually taking advantage of that as well. So Google has also had to expand on what they're doing with their Chromebooks, right? So let's take ourselves 10 years ago. A laptop was really out there to replace a desktop, right? Instead of having to work on at your desktop at home, you're now with the laptop device able to carry it around with you and take it on the go, right? Honestly, at the time, battery wasn't a very big concern, and hey, you had a laptop that really had everything you could possibly need. But fast forward to now, you're getting to the point where Chromebooks, we've become spoiled, right? So we're so used to smartphones now that battery life is such a big important asset to us that laptops, not only just Chromebooks, are starting to take away some of those peripherals to make things smaller, lighter, and then make more rooms for the battery space so that way laptops and devices last a whole lot longer. So as you can see there, this could essentially cause a problem in the education space, right? If peripherals that we know are used so much in education are not going to be able to be connected to Chromebooks, which are the leading device, right? We need to figure out a way to bridge those gaps. So I spoke about peripherals earlier. So over 90%, and this is in classrooms, admin buildings, et cetera. And I think this is at this point pretty obvious to all of us on the phones today that essentially over 90% of these classrooms are going to have some sort of accessory in there that they're connecting to their hardware devices, right? Keyboard, mice, overhead projectors, presenters, right? There's a lot of different tools that teachers are using today that we really need to find a way to help them close those gaps of connecting everything, right? And at the same time, funny enough, there's so many accessories in the classroom that less than 10% of them actually have docking stations, right? So does that mean that adapters are being used more? Does that mean that maybe teachers are essentially having to buy their own devices to connect to their hardware so that way they can have something that makes their lives easier, right? A lot of that is being seen as well, that the fact that docking stations aren't being bought preliminary in bids, et cetera, with school budgets. So we wanted to dive even a little bit deeper, right? So let's take ourselves, we put our teacher shoes on, and let's, as a normal day as a teacher, what are we seeing, right? And I think the big thing we're trying to show here is the fact that as a teacher, you're going to have a lot of different peripherals on your desk because at the end of the day, you have a lot of different tools to teach to your kids, right? And specifically around teachers, and I think the one thing I want to hone in on here is that, on the forefront of these buying opportunities, the hardware devices are always going to be priority number one, totally understand, but at the same time, teachers are getting the grunt of having to buy a lot of their accessories themselves after the fact, right? So now they're going to Staples, Office Depot, Amazon, et cetera, to actually have to buy their own accessories that we, the reseller or the buyer at the time of the education buying space aren't really thinking about that in the initial quotes because we're just saying, hey, as long as we cover the hardware device, we're good to go. But obviously the accessories are a huge part of an ecosystem in a teacher's desk, especially in a day-to-day, that we want to make sure that we can help ease a lot of the clutter and all the connections and et cetera, just to make sure we can make their lives a little bit easier as well. Then switching gear, right? So workstations specifically for students. A lot of times laboratories are a big solution in the education space. And specifically these workstations for students, right? A lot of times we're starting to see now that with one-to-one Chromebook deployment, that these Chromebooks are actually being connected to external monitors, for example. And the big reason why is to hone in the fact that standardized testing is becoming a big part of these devices, right? So these devices are being purchased because of standardized testing and to be able to alleviate some of the paper and pen that we're used to using back in the day for standardized testing. So to have a docking station that helps connect all these different peripherals, right, I think is, again, another big pain point that we can alleviate in these types of scenarios. So I know we've talked a lot about Chromebooks, and I know we've talked a lot about accessories. So let's actually dive into the actual docking station solution itself. All right, guys, why does it make sense for education? So just to take a step back at a very extreme high level, we actually want to see what the docking TAM looks like today, right? So this is the actual dock market. And to simply put, you're going to see that big blue thing on the right, proprietary at 43%. So docking technology can really be split into two form factors, right? You have your proprietary docks, which are those old school OEM docking stations that you used to plug, stab on the bottom of your laptop, provides power and your connections, et cetera. Usually that was a majority of the market, right? Like 60, 70 plus points of proprietary docks out there in the market. And now finally, in 2019, universal docks are now at 55% of the dock market, right? So now universal docking stations are the king advantage to the point now where dockings in general has been growing 33% year over year because these universal docking solutions are allowing someone like an education buyer to be able to buy a docking solution that's going to work for all the different hardware devices and deployments that they have in their ecosystems today, guys. So this is a key thing that we'd love to call out. And as you can see in the universal docking world, USB-C, of course, as you can know, is the type of port that's going to be on your laptop, is what's actually the majority of the business today. So even those old school USB-A docks that we're used to seeing as well. They're actually less of the market share now. So again, guys, let's just make sure that we keep this in mind because a lot of this stuff trickles and waterfalls into different verticals, like an education vertical. So again, what have we talked about? Chromebook adoptions, that's obviously on the rise, 60%. Presentation tools and peripherals, right? We know that these accessories are in these education verticals. So how do we connect all that stuff with, especially with the lack of ports that are happening with Chromebooks, is that a docking solution is becoming more and more prevalent, and it actually makes a whole lot of sense that if we start to have these in our preliminary conversations, it's tough to ignore the need that it's truly being able to take care of. So I love talking about this, especially with you guys, because I think it's a great way to understand, how are you, the reseller, making money, right? So, I mean, that's, at the end of the day, it's definitely a nice discussion point to review. And we all know that the hardware device, as much as it's the priority in all of our buying needs, that the reseller is not making that much money on the hardware device, right? And especially with Chromebooks, their price point isn't even that high. So a 2 to 5% margin dollar on something like that is really not that much. But the cool thing is with accessories, whether it's a docking station or a mouse, charging cabinet, whatever it is that you're selling as an accessory to that platform, 10 to 50% margin on those devices add up, right? So at the end of the day, you're making a whole lot more money on that attach rather than just the hardware device itself. So again, guys, this is just a fun little exercise that I like to show because I think it, at the very least, allows you guys to see, oh, you know what, it maybe does make sense to prioritize these accessories in the initial conversations, especially when we know in education that they're going to end up buying these things anyways. It's just making sure that we have those initial discussions. So let's really now talk about these pain points, right? There's a lot of challenges out there that we're trying to address, and I think that if we are very knowledgeable of what pain points we're facing in the education space, we're able to use docking as a way to relieve some of these pain points. So let's move forward here. So we're going to have two different buckets, right? At the end of the day, a teacher and IT admin, they're potentially going to have some of the same pain points, but a lot of times they're going to differ quite a bit, right? So like I had said earlier, putting our teacher's shoes back on, what we're really trying to do at the end of the day is allow a teacher to have more time to actually do his or her job and actually teach their students, right? So we want to alleviate all the time waste that's used to connecting all the different peripherals that they have at their desk. So imagine you come in with your hardware device, having to connect a keyboard, a mouse, to your HDMI cord to your monitor. Oh wait, the display port cord for your projector now, right? So there's a lot of different cables that they have to be responsible for, which in turn usually has a teacher with a ton of different adapters, right? So now they're responsible for not only their hardware device, but now they're responsible for 4 or 5 different adapters. So how do we take those adapters completely out of the system so that way they have a nice, clean docking station that connects to their laptop, right? That's a huge, huge pain point that we can alleviate from them. And then, of course, on the right, an IT administrator, a little bit different. And the main reason why is they're looking at it at a higher level on a mass deployment rate. So they're not necessarily in the trenches every single day dealing with connecting all their hardware devices, but they're really looking at how can we make an IT admin's life easier when they're looking to roll out a, essentially 200-300 type of hardware device situation. And the big thing that you're going to come off the bat is the fact that they're probably going to be balancing a lot of different devices, right? So you're going to have laptops from the early 2000s, some from Chromebooks that were bought maybe 3 or 4 years ago, to some new ones that they're just buying, right? So how do we help them connect those dots so that way they can not have to deal with a bunch of different devices to connect all these different types of hardware laptops, right? So let's find a way to relieve that pain point from them. And of course, last but certainly not least for IT admins, right, is damage, right? They do not want to deal with any type of time to spend having to troubleshoot different devices. So how do we alleviate some of the damage that occurs when you're having to connect so many different cables? Is something that we can definitely discuss down the line with docking. So we've reviewed the pain points, but now we're at the point now where we're in these discussions. What kind of questions are you going to actually be able to ask, right? So I know a lot of people on the phone have had these discussions with educators for a long time now. So this isn't going to essentially something that's going to all of a sudden start a light bulb, but it will allow your buyer to start thinking outside the box of just hardware, right? So specifically, if you ask a question like, hey, if there is one-to-one deployment of Chromebooks or any type of laptop, is that even a scenario that's happening, right? So if there is one-to-one deployment, that means that a student is actually gonna be responsible for their own laptop or Chromebook, right? So if that's the case, that student is most likely gonna be connected to some sort of peripheral, right? And of course, as a tier 3 question is, if they do have all these devices, are they actually using them for standardized testing? Because like I'm saying, like I said earlier, with standardized testing, even for Chromebooks, they're still now being asked to potentially have to buy monitors, so that way for larger viewing needs, et cetera, to actually be able to connect to those types of equipment. So spending all that money on adapters and stuff like that could start to be troublesome. So being able to, again, just provide these questions, essentially, it gets the talking about accessories in the forefront. So definitely not something to, not bad to consider when you're in those conversations. So I like this part of the presentation. These are actually some of our scenarios that we at Kensington have dealt with in the past, and how we've actually been able to use docking solutions as a bridge for some of these pain points that we've had. So these are actually live scenarios, and specifically, let's try out this scenario number 1 here, right? So this is for Mr. and Mrs. IT Director of Jeffries School District. And essentially in this scenario, they're looking to implement new computer labs at each of the schools in their district. They've already spent money on Chromebooks, and they plan on using old monitors, keyboards, and mice to complete the ecosystem, right? I think we've all at this point have heard something very similar to this. What are their concerns and challenges? A lot of times, one, wear and tear on the ports. They want to make sure that the hardware device can stay as new and long as possible, right? And then, of course, spending more than $100 a unit on whatever you can offer me, right? They don't really want to spend that much on an accessory, especially if Chromebooks are already at that $200, $300 price point for them. You want to keep it sub $100 in a lot of situations. And then, of course, smaller the better, right? I mean, at this point, on whether it's a teacher's desk or on those laboratories for students, they want to avoid the clutter as much as possible. So what can we offer them? So specifically, we have a whole line of that we're beginning to launch of nano docks, right? So these are small form factor docking solutions, and specifically this one where you're only going to be able to connect one monitor, but in the education space, one monitor or one projector, et cetera, may potentially be all you need, right? And the cool thing about this is that you're now able to save time having to detach all the different cables from your hardware device, keep them connected to the dock at all times. And then now you have one connection point to your Chromebook or hardware, right? So a huge plus there. And the one thing I also want to mention as well with these docking solutions is that you're now providing power on top of that, right? So now that power cord that a student has to lug around their backpack, or even a teacher, they can now keep at home in their desks and save a whole lot of time and clutter on their desks specifically, and to have a docking solution that does all that for them. So again, reviewing the pain points. One, this is solving a whole lot of those reconnecting and reconnecting issues that we discussed earlier. This dock is actually a great cost-effective docking solution where you're actually going to hit that sub $100 price point. And then, of course, allowing those multiple video options. So if you need DisplayPort for that projector, or if you need HDMI for that monitor, you're going to have that with these docking solutions. So a great opportunity here to show you a really good clutter-free solution for your classroom or your office. So now, moving to scenario number 2. Again, this is going to be a little bit different, but another one that's going to use a lot of these concerns and challenges are probably going to be like, okay, you know what? I've definitely heard this probably very recently. So as we get started, we plan on doing a massive rollout of new Chromebooks for the students. We'll only be replacing hardware that has been in use for more than 5 years. So what are the challenges that are going to happen here? One, like we said earlier, Chromebooks, a lot of time they're trying to balance that old USB-A with the new USB-C. How do we balance that? That's going to be a challenge, right? Not only that, but there's, like I said earlier, external monitors are becoming a thing, and especially in education. Sometimes you may need dual monitors. How do we process a solution for that? And then, of course, you're never not going to see this as a challenge, but budget's always going to be tight, right? So is there a docking solution out there that's going to fit their needs? And, of course, Kensington, we have that docking solution. So specifically, this is a crossover docking station that we have. And you must be wondering, what does crossover even mean? But as you see that dongle in the top right there, you're going to see that USB-C connector that connects to any of your new Chromebook devices that have USB-C ports. But Now, when you have those legacy USB-A Chromebooks, that little dongle, as long as you attach it, you now have a docking station that works for those USB-A Chromebooks. That is absolutely key in this solution, right? So not only that, but you notice how that dongle has an attachment there. So that's not even adapted. That's something you have to keep in your backpack, or a student has to be responsible for something like that. That thing stays attached and they can never lose it. So that is great. That's a great solution to really provide to your buyer who's looking to balance a whole different old or new line of Chromebooks or laptops, right? So again, guys, being able to fix those pain points are what I'm trying to get the point across here when discussing these docking solutions. And then this next slide, I actually really enjoy this slide as well. This is a great a price breakdown, as you will, of, you know, proprietary docks are still what a lot of people assume a dock is, right? And a lot of times a universal or a crossover dock is still very new technology for an educator. So a lot of times upfront cost is extremely is a high topic point. So taking the discussion and pivoting it from what's your upfront cost versus what your cost is going to be over 7 to 10 years is an extremely beneficial conversation for you guys to have with your end users, right? So specifically with the proprietary dock, if you're spending, let's say, $200 on that dock and your first deployment of them, 500 Chromebooks or old laptops, for example, you're going to have to buy those proprietary docks every single time you buy a new hardware device, right? So that, after a while, starts to add up. Now, with the universal or crossover docking station, you're truly going to have that price point, which essentially up front could be higher. It could be higher, but you're now buying that docking station once, and it's going to last for as long as you need those extra or long-term hardware deployments to be able to connect to those devices, right? So that crossover dock is going to work for that old, you know, initial deployment that you had maybe 5-10 years ago, but it's also going to work for those new laptops 5-10 years down the line as well. So being able to show that and clearly, confidently have that discussion with your end user, I think is a great opportunity for you to be in an advisor role, essentially, and to really provide that confidence that, hey, maybe up front you guys may be shedding a couple extra dollars, but on the long term, this is money that your IT buyer or admin is going to save money. So for other education opportunities specifically, right? So now the IT buyer can, you know, they're not just buying for a classroom, they're usually buying for school districts or multiple. So if you're able to save them money in the long run on those types of rollouts, again, they're going to give you a huge thumbs up for something like that. So let's make sure that we have that confidence to speak about costs in these situations. So guys, thank you so much. First off, I know I went through a whole lot of information, but just again, to summarize what we've discussed. So like I said earlier, Chromebooks are king. Let's make sure that we're confident in having accessories to work with those Chromebooks. And of course, with all the tools, peripherals, and our education ecosystems, how do we make sure that we provide a solution for them that's going to connect to all those peripherals, right? And then of course, you know, with 2019 rolling in, education buying season is going to slowly start because every year it tends to start earlier and earlier. So making sure that we can have these discussions early on, specifically around even testing season and budgets are starting to get set. Let's make sure we have these types of discussions. And then, like I said, last but certainly not least, right, it does truly pay to accessorize, especially as a reseller, because then at the end of the day, you're truly getting more of that margin dollar that you can keep in your guys' pocket. So, guys, again, thank you so much for your time. And now I'm going to move it back to Carolyn.
Well, thank you for attending our training on docking stations in the modern classroom. We hope you found it helpful and learned a few things that you can take away.